A well-thrown roller can seem like magic. Like a remote-controlled car, skilled players can make the disc go any direction they need, and having a roller for that low ceiling shot is incredibly useful. But for newer players, it can be hard to get the disc down on that perfect roller angle. So to help you out, this is our complete guide on throwing rollers. So if you've never thrown a roller intentionally before, that's going to be step one. The idea behind this type of roller is just to get you comfortable with throwing a shot that rolls on the ground rather than one that goes up in the air. It's going to end up going fairly straight. It's not going to go super far, but it's definitely going to be a roller, and it's going to kind of get your feet wet with the world of throwing rollers. So a good disc to start with is something that's really slow and quite understable. So usually an Underworld, or maybe something like a Witness, or even a Diamond from Latitude 64 is going to be a good choice. And you're going to want to throw this pretty low and on an Anheuser angle. You want to throw it low because it's common for newer players to try and throw really maximum distance rollers where they throw super high on a big angle and they try and get that huge distance line. But most players will find that their disc kind of fades out before they get to that point. And so we'll get there eventually, but for starting out, try and get your disc down on the ground pretty quickly and try and get it turned up as much as you can. It's not going to be as vertical as like you see for maximum distance rollers from a lot of our touring professionals, but it's going to be on a little bit more of what's called a cut angle. That's when, for a right-handed backhand throw, the disc is leaning towards the left. That's a cut angle because that's the direction that a disc would roll for a cut roller. But it's going to be on a pretty good cut angle, and it's going to roll fairly straight while it's standing up. And then it usually just kind of flips over on its top at the end. It might finish left, but at the end of the day, it's lost a lot of speed at that point, so it's rolled fairly straight and just kind of flops on either side. So once you've gotten the easier style of roller down, it's time to graduate to more of a maximum distance type shot. For this shot, you're going to want something a little bit faster, so usually I roll a Renegade, but I know a Fury is a popular choice, or something like a Queen could also be useful, but it's important to make sure it has a good edge for a roller. Usually something faster is going to have a little bit less resistance against the ground as well. So for this type of roller, you're going to put a little bit more Anheuser on it, so you're going to end up leaning back a little bit more as you're throwing, and you're going to throw it a lot higher up in the air. The idea is to have the disc in the air for a longer period of time so that it has less resistance. The longer that a disc spends rolling on the ground, the more resistance it has from the grass or the bumps or different things that it runs into as it's rolling. And so if you can delay that for as long as possible, you're going to get more distance usually. Now the reason rollers go farther than air shots is because towards the end of their flight, where an air shot hits the ground, a roller has already hit the ground, so it tends to keep going just a little bit farther before it finishes. This maximum distance type roller, you're going to aim for a little bit more of a vertical landing, because if it's on more cut, it doesn't have as much time rolling or as much speed when it hits the ground to stand up and finish all the way to the right. So this shot needs to land a good bit more vertical than before, and it's going to tend to tail off farther to the right. So it's important to account for that when shaping your shot. Now this type of roller is a lot harder than the easier type of roller because it requires a more extreme Anheuser, it's a more specialized shot, and you have to know your disc a lot better. It takes a long time to get to know a roller disc so that you know exactly what angle you need to put it on to get that shot. The type of disc you throw for a roller can have a huge effect on the result. Usually for a distance roller, you're going to want something without a ton of glide because it's not going to move too far left and right, and like I said, you want something pretty understable. But if you get something that's more towards the overstable side, you're going to find it's a lot more useful for a cut roller. Just like in the air, overstable discs are going to move towards the left on a roller and understable discs are going to move to the right. So if you're trying to throw a cut roller with a more overstable disc, you're definitely going to want to get it into the ground quicker because it's not going to want to hold to that right side as long. So you want to get it to the ground pretty quick and pretty vertical because it's going to fight that flip and it's going to try and go fairly straight, but it's going to finish pretty far to the left. If you throw something even more understable than your usual roller disc, that's usually a quick flip type roller, where it's going to hit the ground and flip, and it's going to finish typically a bit farther to the right. And if you try and throw a straighter disc on a roller, you can actually get a pretty straight result. It's just a little hard to get the disc on the right angle. So that's definitely a shot that I would practice before I pull it out in a tournament. When throwing forehand rollers, it's a lot easier to get a more vertical angle on the disc, and so usually players will lean towards a more overstable disc. That's because it's going to hold that angle without flipping over to the right. You could technically throw a forehand roller with an understable disc. It's just a lot easier to throw it a little bit more vertically and trust that the disc is going to hold straight for that long period of time before ideally finishing left. But it's very similar to that beginner style roller, just with a more overstable disc. Mid-ranges are also useful for rollers. They typically don't go as far because they have a wider rim, but because they roll so slowly, they end up rolling super straight. And so if you need that controllable shot, learning how to roll a mid-range can be really beneficial. Before you decide to throw a roller, it's important to check the conditions of the ground that you're going to be rolling on. If the grass is super long, you're going to have a bad time. If the grass is super wet, you're going to have a bad time. If the ground is rough, it has a lot of bumps, you're going to have a bad time. If there's a lot of sticks and debris in your way, you're going to have a bad time. If there's not a lot of margin for error, if you need to keep the disc down a specific path, you're going to have a bad time. If it's uphill, you're going to have a bad time. And if it's windy, you're definitely going to have a bad time. So if all the conditions are okay, a roller can be hugely successful, but it's important to make sure to account for all those variables. If the grass is wet or super long, that's going to slow down your disc. Same for throwing uphill. And that ends up taking a lot of distance off of your rollers, and it prevents your understable rollers from flipping up and finishing to the right. And if you're trying to throw a roller in the wind, for a right-hand backhand roller, if the wind is coming into the top of the disc, it pushes it to the left, but it also tends to kind of wash it out. And so it ends up cutting off a lot of distance and pushing you way left of where you intended. If the wind is coming underneath the disc, that tends to actually lift it up. It pushes it to the right, but it lifts it up and tends to put it on more and more of a cut angle. So it ends up just kind of spinning out and you end up with a lot less distance. In a tailwind, you have to put a lot more angle than you'd think on your disc because it's not going to flip as much before it hits the ground, and it's going to be a lot harder to get it to flip once it's on the ground. And in a headwind, don't throw rollers in headwinds. So that is our complete guide on throwing rollers. Let us know if you have any tips that you've learned or any questions about throwing rollers down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any other beginner's guide content from Dynamic Discs on how to become a better disc golfer.